The China RMB will not replace the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. China has no plans nor ambitions to use the China RMB to replace the dollar as the world's reserve currency. The RMB will, however, be used as a major trading currency, and that is going to have profound negative consequences for the US dollar and for the United States. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kevin, and we are inside China Business. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. It is still the preferred medium of exchange between countries, especially the developed countries. But the very thing that made the US dollar so attractive in the past, those days are over. US dollars are now very common and very plentiful across the world, and this is evidence of our failures, not our successes. The United States became the world's largest economy right after World War I. And right after World War II, it exploded in size and power because the United States was the only industrial economy in the world that wasn't destroyed by the war. So when rebuilding began, the United States had to lend to our allies, even to our former enemies, to enable them to get back on their feet. This is when the United States was the biggest creditor nation in the world. The rest of the world had nothing. Everything was in ruin. Everything had to be rebuilt again. Homes, schools, factories, transportation networks, roads and highways, ports. And the United States was the only one who had money to lend. And the United States was the only one with an industrial sector, still intact factories that could make the things that the world desperately needed. So the US created billions of dollars in loans to other countries. And these countries had to repay those loans in US dollars. And as these loans were repaid, the United States did not need to repatriate those interest payments into our own economy. Instead, they could remain invested abroad. And even our former enemies benefited from this arrangement. This is how the US dollar became the reserve currency after World War II. The United States was the only major economy that had excess capital to lend. It was the only economy that had factories that could produce. And let's emphasize again what made this possible. The United States was the creditor nation. Other countries were borrowing from us. Our trade surpluses began piling up. Countries bought far more from us than we bought from them. So it was just trade surpluses, year after year after year, after decade after decade after decade. Giant pools of capital that our business executives, our industrialists, even our politicians could invest any way we wanted. And this represented an income stream, an important asset also. All these loans were being repaid by other countries to the United States. All this dramatically increased the living standards of American citizens. Factory jobs were plentiful and well-paying. We couldn't make products fast enough. As soon as something was produced in an American factory, it was out the door either to be sold to an American consumer or to a customer in a friendly country to be repaid in US dollars. Literally everything about that world that I just described is gone now. The United States is no longer the biggest creditor nation in the history of the world. We're the biggest debtor nation in the history of the world. Now, when we flood the world with US dollars, it's not us lending money to other countries. It's other countries lending money to us. We're borrowing from them. Instead of trade surpluses, we run trade deficits. We run $2 billion of trade deficits every day. Every day we borrow from the rest of the world $2 billion so that we can buy things made elsewhere in the world. Our government borrowing is even worse, if we can believe that. $3 trillion this year. $10 billion a day, every day, going out to forever. The huge trade deficits that we run mean we need to borrow money to buy products made in other countries' factories. The huge fiscal deficits that we run mean that we need to borrow money from other countries just to keep our schools open and our parks cleaned and our Navy floating. Almost everyone now runs trade surpluses with the United States. So let's consider two countries that have just recently agreed to settle their trade in RMB: Saudi Arabia and China. Saudi Arabia has huge trade surpluses with almost everyone in the world except China. China has huge trade surpluses with almost everyone in the world except Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and China both have more dollars than they know what to do with. The last thing they need is more dollars. They don't know what to do with the dollars they already have. And whenever China or Saudi Arabia does business with another country around the world, dollars pour in. Then they're routed to bankers in New York or London who take their cut. Currencies are converted over, and then the proceeds are forwarded on to Beijing or Saudi Arabia, Riyadh. China and Saudi both figure, why not just take out that step entirely? Let's just do this directly. So that's what they're doing, using swap lines set up in Saudi Arabia and here in China. By setting up their own trading lines, all they have to do is mutually agree on a trading band outside the US dollar. The US and London bankers don't receive their money, don't make any money from fees. Transactions happen faster, and there's no chance of foreign governments or regulators even examining the trades, let alone being able to seize the proceeds from them. And in this way, the value of the currencies are determined by themselves instead of by the global markets. This is what China is doing with countries that have been locked out of US dollar trading. Countries where their settlement accounts and reserve accounts in New York and London have been seized by regulators there. Iran, Venezuela, and Russia are key countries in this category. These are countries that have a lot of stuff to sell to the world, and China is their main trading partner anyway. Many of the senior people in China's finance and trade ministries have been educated in the West, and they understand that the factors that made the United States dollar a reserve currency for the world does not apply to the China currency, the RMB. First, China is very reluctant to allow its currency to float in the world markets, to be subject to other governments' determination or speculators determining the value of their currency in the world markets. China also will need trillions of dollars in capital to be brought back into China to help develop and urbanize their interior provinces, the massive central and western provinces that still need to be industrialized. So they are not in the same position that the United States was following World War II. China does need most of their trading profits earned abroad to be brought back into China. And even their outgoing projects, like the Belt and Road Initiative, are very strategic and carefully measured, and are only done to further deepen China's advantages in supply chains and logistics. China has been making it clear, implicitly and lately explicitly, that this is how they prefer to do business now. Nobody wants the RMB to be the reserve currency of the world. Not even China wants that. But the advantages of RMB as a trading currency are becoming pretty obvious to everybody. Think here, especially countries that do a lot of exporting, especially with respect to raw materials and unfinished products that China needs, and import a lot of materials that China produces. Consider Brazil, China, soybeans and corn for electric cars and vehicles. Chile, China, copper and ores in exchange for heavy machinery. The Middle East and China, natural gas, petroleum, energy in exchange for infrastructure projects. Russia, China, food, energy in exchange for everything China makes. We know for a fact this is happening, and the trade is big. We get reports from S&P, the shipping reports, that tell us shipping cargoes from all over the world. And there are lots of ships going from here, in and out of Qingdao, that don't show up on any of those reports. Millions of tons of cargoes coming in and out every day that are not being reported because they're outside the US dollar system. They're not counting all the ships coming in from Russia, for example, or all the stuff that comes through the pipelines from there. Right now, Russia has enough LNG in the Far East to power most of the Pacific Rim with cheap electricity. China's scooping up most of that. And a lot of their petroleum coke, too. Literally everything coming out of Venezuela or Iran is already outside the dollar and being traded in RMB. Soon enough, there will be a lot of ships outbound South America and Africa doing the same. Food and energy and raw materials come in, finished products go out. And there's no need to ask New York or London permission to do anything. When you see the talking heads on TV, or they're interviewing a Treasury Department official or a spokesman from Washington, and they say, the US dollar is the world's reserve currency and there's nothing else that can replace it, they're right about that. No institution in world history has borrowed more money than the United States government. Or when you see Wall Street bankers or analysts on TV celebrating how deep the pools of US dollars are around the world and how nothing can replace the US dollar. They're right about that too. No country in the history of the world has had to borrow so much from the rest of the world to get the things they need while producing so little. These titanic reserves of dollars around the world that everybody is so proud of, they're not our assets, they're our liabilities. They are assets of other countries who have loaned money to us. And now the world has so many dollars that even poor countries don't want to use them anymore. And they're looking for another way to do business. And China is showing them the way. How to do business without using dollars. The China RMB will never be the world's reserve currency, but it is already one of the world's favorite trading currencies. And the advantages to that are obvious to almost everybody not working on Wall Street or in Washington, D.C. Remember how it happened that the United States dollar became the world's reserve currency. By producing more than we needed, by having a monolithic factory sector, by lending to other countries to help them develop. Who does that sound like lately? Who now is considered the factory of the world? Which country now is lending to other countries in Latin America, in East Europe, in Africa, to help them develop their economies. Which country now is doing more and more and more business and dictating the terms of that trade, and now dictating the currencies which will be used to conduct that trade? As more and more of these bilateral trading relationships develop, as RMB is more commonly used in hundreds of billions of dollars in trade now, and then trillions of dollars in trade. As these other countries realize they do not need these pools of US dollars to do business with other countries around the world, those dollars will go back to the United States. The inflation, which is terrible now, is going to become intolerable as trillions and trillions of dollars in liabilities come pouring back to American markets. It was good while it lasted.